When I first met the Ashcrofts, I thought I'd stepped into a world made of glass. Everything sparkled, smiles, silverware, even their lies. Vivienne Ashcroft, my mother-in-law, kissed my cheek like she was marking territory. "You're the nurse, right? How noble." Preston shook my hand with the kind of politeness that made me feel like a resume he didn't approve. Blake, my husband, squeezed my fingers under the table that night, whispering, "Don't mind them, Cora. They'll come around." 3 years later, they still hadn't. Every visit became a quiet test I didn't know I was taking. I learned to smile when Vivienne corrected my posture, to laugh when Preston made jokes about working girls. Blake said I was being sensitive, but love makes you swallow poison and call it devotion. When I looked at the Ashcroft mansion, I saw a future I thought I wanted, elegant, stable, respected. What I didn't see was how easily wealth hides cruelty. By the time I realized it, I was already in too deep. It started with the gold-embossed envelope. Vivienne's handwriting, perfect, controlled. The Ashcroft annual spring dinner, it read. Been to their dinners before. They were always performances, crystal glasses, curated laughter, and conversations sharp enough to bleed, but this one felt different. Blake was nervous. He said, "Just let's get through it quietly this year, okay?" I should have known then. He wasn't asking for peace, he was asking for silence. That morning I ironed my dress 3 times, pressed my hair until it shone, and practiced polite smiles in the mirror. I told myself this time would be different, but when we arrived, Vivienne greeted us like royalty had entered, then looked right through me. "Cora," she said, "why don't you sit over there? I've arranged something special." I followed her gesture, toward a small table near the back, surrounded by Blake's teenage cousins. I laughed, thinking it was a mistake. It was. That was the night everything began to unravel. Laughter rolled across the room like waves, drowning out my thoughts. I sat at the so-called children's table, beside a boy who kept texting under the tablecloth. Across the room, my husband sat next to a blonde woman I didn't recognize. She leaned in close when she spoke. Vivienne's voice cut through the noise. "Cora, dear, I hope you don't mind. Penelope flew in from Paris just for tonight. You remember Penelope, Blake's old fiancée?" I froze. Of course I remembered the name. Blake had told me she was part of his past, nothing more. Penelope smiled politely, her hand resting near Blake's wine glass. "You're even prettier than I imagined." My stomach tightened. Vivienne continued, "Such a shame things didn't work out between you two, but life has a funny way of correcting itself." The table laughed. Blake said nothing. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and tried to breathe. My reflection looked foreign, pale, tired, humiliated. That was the moment I realized Vivienne wasn't trying to exclude me. She was trying to erase me. When I returned to the table, the laughter had grown louder. Preston raised his glass. "A toast to the Ashcrofts, may our family always uphold its name and standards." Everyone clinked glasses, except me. I stared at Blake, silently begging him to meet my eyes. He didn't. Later, when the dessert arrived, I leaned in and whispered, "Why did you let her do that?" He didn't answer right away, just kept his gaze fixed on his plate. Finally, he muttered, "You're overreacting, it's just seating. Don't make a scene." That sentence broke something inside me. Don't make a scene. I'd built my life around not making scenes, swallowing pain, softening edges, being grateful. When we left that night, Vivienne kissed my cheek again, leaving a faint trace of lipstick. "You handled yourself well, dear," she said, smiling. Grace under pressure. The car ride home was silent. Blake reached for my hand. I pulled it away. Something in his eyes flickered, guilt maybe, or fear. I didn't know it then, but I was about to find out just how deep his silence went. It happened by accident. Blake's phone buzzed one night while he was in the shower. Normally I wouldn't look. I trusted him or wanted to. But the preview message made my blood run cold. "Vivienne, keep her calm until after the IPO. We can't risk her walking away now." My hands shook as I unlocked the phone. No password. He must have forgotten. There were messages, dozens of them, between Blake and his parents. They called me the liability. They were planning to phase me out once the company went public. The seed money they'd used. My grandfather's $200,000 gift for our future, Vivienne had written. "Once it's finalized, file quietly. She'll take whatever we give her." I couldn't breathe. I scrolled further and found a folder labeled Exit. Inside, emails from a divorce lawyer, timelines, even talking points for irreconcilable differences. My marriage wasn't a partnership, it was a strategy. I put the phone back where I found it before Blake came out. He smiled at me like nothing had changed, but everything had. For 3 nights I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes I saw the messages again, Vivienne's words, Blake's replies. Married into a family that saw me as an inconvenience they could eventually discard. But why wait until the company went public? What did my grandfather's money really fund? Blake had said it was for development capital. I'd believed him. I wanted to, but now I needed proof. While he slept, I crept into his home office. The password to his laptop was our wedding date, irony at its finest. His desktop was full of financial reports, investor lists, and strangely, a folder named Archive. Inside were scanned documents, old insurance forms, and one file labeled 2018 incident. My stomach tightened as I clicked it open. Police report, photos of a crushed silver Mercedes, words that made my throat close, hit-and-run investigation, Harbour and Lexington intersection. I felt the air leave my lungs. What was Blake doing with this? Then I saw the name of the victim, Teresa Campos. And the first thought that hit me wasn't fear, it was recognition. Teresa Campos, I knew that name. She worked at St. Mary's, the same hospital where I worked now. The night shift nurses still talked about her sometimes. Sweet woman, they said. Single mom, died walking home. I'd seen her photo once in the break room, a memorial flyer faded with time. I stared at her smiling face on my laptop screen and felt a chill crawl down my spine. Blake's car had been the same model, the same color. He told me once he totaled it in a parking garage accident that same year. But the police report showed something else. Paint transfers, witness statements, an investigation that suddenly went cold after a few days. I checked the timeline. 4 days after Teresa's death. Blake's insurance claim was processed by a firm connected to Preston Ashcroft's law partners. It wasn't coincidence. It was cover-up. I copied everything onto a flash drive, my hands trembling. That night I lay awake listening to Blake's breathing beside me. He looked so peaceful, like someone who'd never known guilt. I realized then, I wasn't married to a man, I was married to a secret. The next morning I went to work like nothing had changed. On the outside I smiled. On the inside I was screaming. Every patient I touched, every child I comforted reminded me of Teresa's boys. They were around 8 and 6 when she died. I imagined them waiting for their mother that night, waiting for someone who would never come home. Blake kissed me goodbye before leaving for a meeting. His touch made my skin crawl. I had 2 choices: pretend I hadn't seen anything or do something that could destroy my life. Reporting him meant exposing the Ashcrofts, losing my marriage, maybe even my career. But staying silent meant becoming part of their lie. That night I emailed a journalist I knew from the hospital's charity fundraisers. Someone who'd once mentioned her husband worked in investigative reporting. I didn't send evidence yet, just a message. If a wealthy family buried a 7-year-old hit-and-run case, would you want proof? Her reply came 2 hours later. Yes, and protection. I wasn't ready for protection yet. I was still playing the good wife, but not for much longer. When Vivienne called to invite me to another dinner, my first instinct was to say no. Then I realized it was the perfect stage. I told her I'd be there, voice steady, polite. She sounded delighted. I spent that week gathering everything I needed: copies of police files, bank records, insurance claims, and the emails from Blake's phone. The journalist, Mara, helped me verify everything. Once we publish, she said, there's no going back. I knew. Blake was too focused on the company to notice how quiet I'd become. Vivienne texted me photos of the dinner setup. Formal attire, dear, presentation matters. Presentation. That was her whole life, perfection polished to hide rot. I looked at myself in the mirror that night. My reflection was calm, unrecognizable, not the humiliated nurse from the children's table, not the naive wife who believed in fairy tales. This time I wasn't walking into a trap, I was building one. The mansion glittered that night, crystal chandeliers, candlelight reflecting off silverware. I wore black. Vivienne noticed immediately. So Sommer, darling, are we in mourning? I smiled. Not yet, she blinked, unsure if I was joking. The guests arrived, business partners, cousins, family, friends. Penelope was there again, glowing under Vivienne's approval. Blake barely looked at me, too busy impressing his father's colleagues. I took my seat at the same small table as before. History repeating. Vivienne made her rounds, compliments dripping like poison. Cora, I hope you're not intimidated tonight. So many accomplished people here. I lifted my glass. I'm sure I'll learn a lot. When dinner was served, Preston rose to make a toast. To legacy, loyalty, and the Ashcroft name. Applause filled the room. I looked around, memorizing faces, their laughter, their ease, their arrogance. In a few minutes, none of them would ever forget this night. I touched the folded documents in my purse and took a deep breath. It was almost time. The clinking of glasses faded. My heart pounded louder than the chatter. I rose from my seat, hands trembling only slightly. I'd like to make a toast too, I said. Every head turned toward me, some surprised, others annoyed. Vivienne's smile stiffened. Oh, how sweet. I lifted my glass. To the truth, and to the people brave enough to face it. A few polite chuckles followed. I didn't sit down. 6 years ago, I began, a woman named Teresa Campos was killed in a hit-and-run a few blocks from this very home. The case was buried, but it shouldn't have been. Silence. I could see Blake's expression change, confusion, then fear. Vivienne's fork slipped from her hand. Cora, Blake said, voice tight. This isn't the time. Oh, I think it's exactly the time. I placed the printed police report on the table. Because the driver's car was registered to you, Blake, and the case disappeared after your father's firm got involved. The room fell still, no one breathed. Vivienne whispered, "What are you doing?" I smiled faintly. "Something you taught me, Mother Ashcroft. Presentation matters." Blake's chair scraped back violently. "This is insane," he snapped. "You're twisting things you don't understand." I didn't blink. "I understand perfectly. You hit a woman and left her there." Murmurs rippled through the guests. Someone gasped. Vivienne shot to her feet, voice icy. "Enough, this is a family dinner, not a circus." "Then stop performing," I said. "Tell them how your firm settled the insurance claim under a fake name." Blake lunged to grab the papers, but I held them high. "Touch me and I'll send every file to the press. They're waiting for my signal." The blood drained from his face. Preston barked, "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," I said. "You all built an empire on lies and you thought I'd stay quiet because I wear your name." Vivienne hissed, "You ungrateful little—" "I'm not ungrateful," I cut in. "I'm done." I pulled out my phone and pressed send. Across the room, someone's phone buzzed. Mara's article had just gone live, and the Ashcrofts' empire began to crumble, one headline at a time. The room erupted, phones lit up, faces drained. Blake's uncle read the breaking headline aloud. "ASHCRFT air-linked 2 covered-up hit-and-run." Vivienne stumbled backward, whispering, No, this can't be happening." Preston glared at me. "Do you realize what you've done? You've destroyed this family." "I didn't destroy it," I said. "You did years ago when you decided some lives mattered less than your reputation." Blake slammed his hand on the table. "You'll regret this, Cora." I met his eyes. "I already do." Security came rushing in, confused, unsure whom to protect. Guests began leaving, some in silence, some with whispered disgust. Vivienne shouted after them, "It's all lies, she's unstable." I turned to her, calm and cold. "Funny, that's exactly what you wanted everyone to think when you humiliated me last time." Her face twisted, fury and fear battling beneath her perfect skin. Blake reached for me, voice shaking. "You've ruined me." I whispered, "No, Blake. You ruined yourself the night you left that woman dying." And I walked out of that mansion as the Ashcroft name burned behind me. By morning, every news outlet was running the story. Ashcroft family under investigation, new evidence in unsolved hit-and-run. My phone buzzed non-stop. Reporters, co-workers, even strangers thanking me for speaking up. But the silence from Blake was louder than anything else. He left that night, according to the papers. In questioning, they said, Vivienne's charity projects lost funding within hours. Preston's firm was raided for obstruction. And me, I went back to work at St. Mary, the same hallways where Teresa once walked. People stared at me differently now, not with pity but with something like respect. Mara met me at a cafe that week. "They'll hate you forever," she said softly. "I know," I replied, "but at least I can look in the mirror again." I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was empty. A month later the divorce papers came through, no apology. No closure, just silence. The Ashcrofts were finished, legally, socially, financially. Blake faced charges. His mother disappeared from the public eye. Sometimes I caught myself missing him, or at least the man I thought he was. But love built on lies isn't love, it's captivity. I stood outside the courthouse, the wind cold against my face. The press was still circling, hungry for more. A reporter asked, "Do you regret what you did?" I looked straight into the camera and said, "Truth costs something, I just paid mine." That night I drove past Harbour and Lexington, the place where Teresa died. I left white lilies there, then I whispered, "You can rest now." The lights of the city blurred through my tears. Justice had come, but it wasn't sweet, it was bittersweet. Justice has a cost no one warns you about. The morning after the story broke, cameras waited outside my apartment. Neighbours whispered, some called me brave, others called me vindictive. At work I heard nurses whisper in the hall, "That's her, the one who exposed her husband." I pretended not to care, but every word pierced like glass. The worst was the loneliness. My phone used to buzz with messages from Blake's family, dinner invites, birthdays, fake warmth. Now nothing. My own parents were proud, but they didn't understand the hollow ache left behind. I'd imagined justice would feel triumphant, but instead it felt like standing in the ruins of something I once loved. Teresa's sons wrote me a letter that week. Thank you for not letting them forget our mom. I cried harder reading that than I ever did for Blake, because maybe justice isn't supposed to make you happy, it's supposed to make things right. 2 weeks later the news cycle had moved on, but the damage lingered like a scar that wouldn't fade. Preston was indicted. Vivienne fled to a private villa in Spain. Blake was officially charged with vehicular manslaughter. Reporters still hounded me for comments. Some headlines praised me as the nurse who brought down the Ashcrofts. Others called me the wife who destroyed her own. I tried not to read them, but curiosity always won. My favourite was the cruelest one. Cora Mitchell, heroine or homewrecker. They didn't understand. The home was already wrecked long before I lit the match. I stopped wearing my wedding ring that week. It left a pale circle on my finger, a ghost of the life I thought I had. Some nights I still dreamed of Blake. His hand in mine, the version of him that only existed before I learned the truth. I'd wake up shaking, whispering to the dark, "You chose this, not me." 3 months later I got a letter from Blake. It arrived without a return address, but I recognized his handwriting instantly. Sharp, elegant, cold, he wrote. "You destroyed everything. I hope you're proud. I loved you once, even if you'll never believe that." I tore it in half before finishing, but later that night I taped it back together. Because a part of me needed to face it. The man who ruined lives could still sound human on paper. I visited him once after his conviction. Just once, when they brought him into the visiting room, he looked smaller, tired, hollow. "Why did you come?" he asked. "To see if there's any part of you worth remembering," I said. "And did you find it?" I looked at him for a long time. "No, you buried it the night you drove away." As I left, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. I started volunteering at a trauma center downtown, a place for victims of hit-and-runs and their families. It began as therapy for me, but it became something bigger. One day, a teenage boy came in, nervous and quiet. When I asked his name, he said, "Matthew Campos, Teresa's son." My throat tightened. "You've grown," he smiled shyly. "Grandma told us what you did. She said Mom can rest now." We talked for an hour. He wanted to study law someday, to make sure people like them don't get away with things anymore. When he left, he hugged me. "Thank you, Miss Cora, for not being afraid." That night I realized healing wasn't just moving on. It was passing the torch. Teresa lost her voice that night on Harbour Street. I found mine, and maybe that's how the world balances itself, one truth at a time. Sometimes I still write letters to Blake, not to send, just to let the ghosts speak. I write about the life we could have had if honesty had mattered more than image. About the children we never had, the dreams that died with our marriage. Then I burn the letters, because some stories don't deserve to live forever. One evening I found myself outside our old house. The "for sale" sign swayed in the wind. Through the window I could still picture that dinner table, the night I told the truth. I smiled, not in triumph but in peace. I whispered, "You once told me power was about control, but you were wrong. Power is about choice, and I finally made mine." Then I walked away. For the first time in years I felt light. It started with an idea. What if no one else ever had to feel as powerless as Teresa did? I used part of my settlement to start a foundation in her name, the Campos Trust. We offered legal aid for hit-and-run victims, funded therapy and helped families rebuild. Every time I signed a grant form or approved a check, I thought of those 2 boys, of the woman who died alone on a cold street while Blake drove away. Her story had become my compass. The first fundraiser drew hundreds. People cried, shared, donated. A journalist asked me, "Why do you care so much?" I smiled. "Because justice isn't a headline, it's a heartbeat, and I don't want it to stop." That night I looked up at the stars and whispered, "We did it, Teresa, they'll remember you." It wasn't revenge anymore, it was redemption. 3 years passed before I heard from Vivienne again. It was a voicemail, her voice shaking. "You destroyed us, are you happy now?" For the first time her words didn't sting. They sounded hollow. I didn't call back. Later that night I played it again, not out of cruelty but curiosity. That voice had once terrified me. Now it only reminded me how fragile power really is when it's built on lies. People like Vivienne mistake silence for weakness, but silence is just the space where strength grows. I deleted the message for a long moment. I sat in my quiet apartment, surrounded by warmth, laughter and peace, the kind of home the Ashcrofts mansion never had. Justice had already spoken. I didn't need to. One morning at the hospital, a new volunteer joined our team, a trauma nurse named Caleb. He was kind, quiet, with the same steady hands I used to admire in myself before everything broke. He didn't ask about my past. He just noticed when I looked tired and brought coffee without a word. We spent months talking between shifts about patience, life, loss, and second chances. One evening he said softly, "You've been through hell, haven't you?" I smiled. "And came out clean." He laughed. "Then maybe it's time you stop living like you're still burning." Something in me shifted. For the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted by the Ashcrofts. I felt seen. Maybe love wasn't about fixing someone. It was about finding someone who didn't think you were broken in the first place. On Teresa's birthday, I visited her grave with her sons. They were taller now, almost grown. They brought sunflowers, her favorite. We stood in silence for a long time before the older one said, "She would have liked you." I smiled through the tears. "I wish I could have known her." The younger one looked up. "You kind of did, you fought like she would have." My chest ached in the best way possible. They didn't see me as the woman who exposed a scandal. They saw me as someone who made things right. When they left, I stayed behind. "I hope you're proud," I whispered to the marble stone. "You didn't die in vain." A soft breeze brushed my face like an answer. I closed my eyes and breathed. For once there was no bitterness, only peace. Justice doesn't erase pain. It transforms it. Years later, I sometimes catch my reflection and almost don't recognize her. The woman who stood trembling with a wine glass in hand, facing an empire built on lies. That night broke me open, but it also made me whole. People still ask if I regret it, exposing them, losing Blake, walking away from wealth. I always say the same thing. I didn't lose anything. I just gave back what never belonged to me. As I walk home from the hospital, I see a woman pushing a stroller, exhaustion etched on her face. She smiles politely and I smile back. Maybe she's coming from a night shift. Maybe she's just trying to get home safe. I think of Teresa, of every woman who's ever been silenced, and I whisper, "Not this time." The stars above blink like witnesses, because sometimes the quietest victories are the loudest truths.